We'll take a look at today's papers. We're joined now by foreign policy commentator Thom Woodroofe. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've got a little bit to talk about if you want to have a look at foreign policy this morning, because some people prefer it over others, it would seem.
Yes, well, indeed. With Gillard's quote overnight that she doesn't think it's her forte, but it is mostly happening overseas today.
That's how it's being reported. She did, to be accurate, and maybe I'm just being a bit pedantic here, she said it wasn't her passion, which is different from being her forte. Something she's genuinely not interested in, rather than a forte being I'm not good at it. So just to make that clear, it's the pedant in me, sorry.
Look, for people like me who are interested in foreign policy, it is a bit disappointing to see someone like Rudd, who is so interested in it, not be in that top job.
Yep.
But when you look across the Western world, there are leaders like Reagan. He had very little experience in anything to do with foreign policy before he became president. Same with Thatcher. I mean, it was only a few months into the job, and she gave that Iron Lady defining speech, which then catalysed her into the foreign policy debate. So, foreign policy experience in a leader isn't sort of a prerequisite for actually doing well in it, to be honest.
No, you just don't want to hear them say, I don't really care about it.
Oh, I don't think she really said that, to be honest. I think that the point that she was making probably was more to her own party base, outlining that, Rudd was a man who came from a background in foreign policy. I came from a background, very traditionalist Labor Party, of interested in education. And I think that's probably how it'll play most.
It's interesting as well that Julia Gillard seems to be positioning Australia closer to Europe, whereas Kevin Rudd in the early days of his prime ministership had that grand plan for an Asian foreign policy collective. So is that a bit of a shift in Labor Party policy as well?
Not too much, to be honest. I mean, the meeting that she's at, the Asia-Europe meeting, it's not really a sexy sort of multilateral forum, but and more just something that she had to attend because we lobbied to get in it. And this is the first time we're in it.
Let's have a look at Crikey, because that's dealing with the twin part of this issue, which is Julia Gillard is there, but Tony Abbott wasn't there in Afghanistan. This is about him passing up that trip to go with Julia Gillard. Yeah,
this is a good piece they put up last night, and I think really sort of overviews the politics behind this quite well. I think there's a bit of naivety in terms of how they've approached the politics on foreign policy on both sides. The bottom line, either way, I think, is that this is probably going to open up the debate on Afghanistan in the next few weeks or months, and that's what the takeaway is for most people. But either way, I think Abbott, at the start of this trip, his intention in going to the UK was clearly to try and gazump Gillard's trip to Brussels. He had secured a meeting with Cameron. He was going to address the Conservative Party and probably get a standing ovation for coming so close to becoming our Prime Minister here. And then this all blew up. Now, he may well have already had a trip scheduled, but I think it's a little bit sort of rich of him to suggest that it's all pure because he probably in the first instance went to the UK with that intention. If Gillard or Rudd had done a trip to address a party conference overseas, the tag Kevin 747 or Julia 747 might have eventuated. This is not sort of a key reason for him to be overseas. But on the flip side of that, this article doesn't sort of touch on this much, but I think it's an important point, is nobody in the media is really asking where is Kevin Rudd. This meeting has a foreign ministers meeting. Half the leaders there have their own foreign ministers with them. Japan, China, South Korea, all their foreign ministers and their leaders are there, but no mention of where Rudd is at the moment, which is very interesting. He's gone completely quiet after his UN trip.
Perhaps because we know the answer. The two of them can't quite travel together yet.
Well, I think it goes one of two ways. If she goes with Rudd to something like this, she lives in his shadow. Yep. If she doesn't go with Rudd, it shows that the relationship is probably fraught with fraction, but nobody's kind of picking up on that at the moment.
Now, The Guardian is taking a look at that Conservative conference.
Yeah, it is, and it's got a great piece, actually, which I think we've got the screen grab of, which actually sort of points out some of the funnier parts, like that the beer they're serving at the conference is called the David Miliband Bitter. But they do mention Abbott, they call him the Mad Monk, and they do mention this jet lag story that's been picked up, which kind of, does sort of show, I think, in many ways, sort of how mundane our party conferences are in Australia.
Well, talking about turning to US politics then, and definitely not the mundane, they've got an interesting candidate stepping up for the White House.
Yeah, US politics never ceases to amaze me. Victorian watchers, listeners might particularly remember the Naked Cowboy who visited, I think, last year or earlier this year.
It's a bit of a misnomer because he's not actually naked, he does wear underpants.
And boots, and a hat. See, I think perhaps the reason he's decided to run for US President is he's seen the success of people who wear cowboy hats, like Bob Catter in Australia, perhaps.
I'll plead ignorance. I know nothing about the Naked Cowboy. Who is he? What does he want?
He's a busker, basically.
Yeah, he's a busker in Times Square in New York who basically walks around in his underpants and cowboy boots and a hat, playing the guitar, and makes extraordinary amounts of money for a busker and then gets these worldwide trips because he is so popular. So he's decided he's going to run for the Republican nomination. So watch out Sarah Palin. But
he's a Tea Partier?
no, look, he just announced it on his website, and it's a pretty sort of standard Republican or Conservative statement about running for US presidency. It's the same stuff, you know, individual freedom, liberty, and, you know, the pursuit of happiness kind of ideals. So that's interesting. But there's also a piece that I brought in from the New York Times, which points to Rahm Emmanuel, who's just left the White House as Chief of Staff, and is now running for Chicago mayor, and that refers to him as the urban cowboy, which is a bit of a probably link to the other one. And that's the main issue dominating US politics at the moment, ahead of the midterms, even though this election will take place after that. And it's interesting that even people like Robert Gibbs, who's the press secretary in the White House now, has been sort of touted as a potential chairman of the DNC. So lots is happening in US politics, but the Cowboys are reigning as always.
The Rahm Emmanuel story is particularly intriguing to me because I note there was his first kerfuffle, if you like, of his campaign, Rahm Emmanuel, where it's great to be back in Chicago
Filmed
video.
in DC.
Yeah, it was actually shot in Washington. Ouch.
Yeah.
And did you think that wasn't going to get out, Rahm?
Exactly. It's a very kind of naive approach, isn't it, from someone who's occupied such a supreme role in the politicking strategy of the White House. Yeah, it was very strange. But there was a great photo circulating in the media yesterday of him on his first walking tour of Chicago, sort of going back and meeting the people, which I think they dubbed the sort of, you know, straight talk something, you know, very direct kind of language, which he's known for. And there were photos of people sort of quite surprised to want to shake his hand and things like that. So I don't think he's sort of getting particularly good media so far for that, but it is his dream job.
He'll get lots of media nonetheless.
Now, the big story yesterday, of course, was interest rates. And like a lot of people, the Australian newspaper got it wrong. I think the survey yesterday suggested that 18 out of 25 senior economists in Australia got the interest rate call wrong.
And I'm on the record from this program yesterday doubting that call and saying they got it wrong the time before. Why should we believe them this time? So that's it. I'm now henceforth never believing any economist on what they think the Reserve Bank is going to do.
Well, economists can say anything, can't they? They're like foreign policy commentators.
But it is interesting how they can't even read their own Reserve Bank right. I mean, because that's two quite high-profile mistakes that the majority of economists have made. And we're told most, you know, sincerely, they're going to raise rates. There's no question.
Well, I think the issue for economists is that it's better to be wrong and running with the herd than to be right and out on your own. But we did have Richard Heaney from RMIT yesterday who said he didn't think the RBA would raise rates.
So Richard wins.
He does.
But the interesting piece that I brought in is the screen grab from the Australian's website when they announced it exactly on 2:30, and they got it wrong. Now, this always happens.
Yes, it does.
Just shows the evolving
We shouldn't beat
nature
up the
of
Australian
media.
too much about this because, as we said earlier there, but for the grace of God go we. But that's life with our online journalism.
Well, maybe
Hit the wrong button and there you are.
Well, I think it sort of just shows, you know, these sort of stories are broken first on things like Twitter rather than sort of necessarily online stories that run. They might be linked to, but it's certainly not them. But it's kind of the Wall Street movie effect, you know, the blue horseshoe blue horseshoe says, you know, interest rates go up. So interesting to see that they got it wrong, let's say.
Tom, always good to see you. Thanks so
You
much.
too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.